The outcast Prince Shaka was born around 1787, his very existence a transgression. He was the illegitimate son of Mfecane, the chief of the small and insignificant Zulu clan, and a woman named Nandi from a neighboring clan. Their union was a violation of custom, and the boy and his mother were treated as outcasts. Shaka's childhood was a relentless series of humiliations. He was taunted for his illegitimacy, bullied by other boys, and despised by his father's household. This crucible of hardship did not break him. It forged him into a figure of immense physical strength, ferocious ambition, and a cold, calculating fury. Driven from their home, he and Nandi sought refuge with her people, and later with the powerful Mfecane paramountcy, a confederation of northern Nguni tribes. It was here, as a young warrior in the armies of the Mfecane chief, Dingiswayo, that the outcast prince found his true calling. Shaka was not just a brave warrior. He was a military innovator, a man who constantly questioned the established traditions of warfare. The warfare of the time was a highly ritualized and largely bloodless affair. Opposing armies would line up, hurl their long, throwing spears, assegai at each other from a distance, shout insults, and then one side would typically retreat with few casualties. To Shaka, this was inefficient and absurd. He began to envision a new, more brutal, and more decisive way of fighting. The forging of a weapon under Dingiswayo's mentorship. Shaka was given command of his own regiment, and he immediately began to implement his revolutionary ideas. First, he redesigned the primary weapon. He did away with the long, flimsy throwing spear and created a new, short-stabbing spear with a broad, heavy blade, the Ikluwa, named for the sucking sound it made. When withdrawn from a human torso, the Ikluwa was a weapon for close quarters, visceral combat. To lose one's Ikluwa in battle was a crime punishable by death. Next, he revolutionized defensive equipment. He introduced a larger, stronger cowhide shield, the Isilangu, which was tall enough to cover the entire body. He drilled his men to use it not just for defense, but as an offensive weapon, to hook an enemy's shield and pull it aside, creating an opening for a fatal thrust with the Ikluwa. He also famously forced his warriors to discard their cumbersome sandals and fight barefoot, a move that toughened their feet and made them faster and more mobile over the rugged terrain. His most brilliant innovation, however, was tactical. He developed a completely new battle formation, the Impando Zankamo, or Horns of the Buffalo. The army was divided into three parts. The main force, the chest, a Sefuba, would engage the enemy head-on. As the enemy was pinned, two flanking horns, as Mpondo, would race out and encircle the enemy, trapping them in a pincer movement. A fourth group of veteran warriors, the loins, Umuva, would be held in reserve, their backs to the battle so as not to get carried away by the excitement, ready to be deployed to exploit a weakness or plug a gap. This was not a ritualized contest. It was a disciplined, coordinated machine of annihilation. The rise of the Zulu Shaka's new regiment, with its terrifying tactics and discipline, became the most effective fighting force in the Mfecane army. When his estranged father, Mfecane, died in 1816, the Mfecane chief Dingiswayo backed Shaka's claim to the Zulu chieftaincy. With the support of his battle-hardened regiment, Shaka returned to the clan that had scorned him, executed his rivals, and seized power. The outcast had become the king of the Zulu. He did not wait long to put his grand vision into practice. He immediately began to transform the entire Zulu clan into a militarized state. He abolished the traditional circumcision rites and instead grouped young men into age-based regiments, Amabutho, housed in great military barracks, Amakanda, their loyalty sworn not to their clan chiefs, but directly to him. The army was now the central institution of Zulu life. When his patron, Dingiswayo, was killed in a war with a rival chief, Shaka moved to fill the power vacuum. He avenged Dingiswayo's death and through a combination of brilliant military victories and shrewd diplomacy, absorbed the entire Mfecane confederation into his own growing Zulu kingdom. The small, insignificant clan was now the most powerful and feared military force in the region, and Shaka was its absolute, undisputed master. The stage was set for a period of explosive expansion and unprecedented violence that would be felt across the entire subcontinent. The Mfecane, the crushing with his new, invincible army, Shaka unleashed a period of conquest and consolidation so violent and transformative that it became known in the Nguni languages as the Mfecane, the crushing, and in the Sotho languages as the Mfecane, the scattering. It was a brutal domino effect of warfare, forced migration, and state formation that convulsed southern Africa for over a decade. Shaka's goal was total war. He did not seek to merely defeat his enemies. He sought to annihilate their armies and absorb their people into his growing Zulu kingdom. Clan after clan that stood in his way was utterly crushed by the horns of the buffalo. The traditional, limited warfare of the past was replaced by a new, merciless totality. After a victory, Shaka would incorporate the surviving women and children into the Zulu nation and enlist the young men into his regiments. Those who resisted were exterminated. The effect was a massive, violent displacement of peoples. Entire tribes were wiped out, while others fled in terror, becoming desperate refugees. These fleeing clans, in turn, attacked other groups in a desperate struggle for land and resources, spreading the chaos outwards in a vast ripple effect. This period saw the complete destruction of many older, smaller societies, but it also saw the birth of new, larger, and more militarized states built in Shaka's image, as leaders like Mashoshu of the Basotho and Mzilikazi of the Ndebele gathered refugees and built fortified kingdoms to survive the storm. Shaka was not just building an empire. He was unintentionally reshaping the entire political and demographic map of southern Africa. The tyranny of a king. As his empire grew, so did Shaka's power and his tyranny. He ruled with an iron and often capricious fist. The discipline he imposed on his army was absolute. The slightest sign of cowardice or disobedience was met with immediate execution. He famously forbade his warriors to marry until they had distinguished themselves in battle, keeping a massive army of young, celibate, and aggressive men in a constant state of readiness. He was a master of psychological terror. He would order entire regiments to be executed for a perceived failure in battle. He developed a network of spies and informants, and the slightest hint of dissent was ruthlessly crushed. His capital, Bulawayo, the place of he who kills, was a place of both immense power and constant fear. While he was a military genius, he was also a deeply troubled and often cruel man, likely scarred by the humiliations of his childhood. He had elevated his mother, Nandi, to a position of great honor as the Queen Mother, but her death in 1827 triggered a descent into a truly terrifying and murderous paranoia. The grief of an elephant, the death of his mother, Nandi, unhinged Shaka completely. He was consumed by a grief so profound that it tipped over into a national madness. He decreed that his grief would be the nation's grief. He ordered a period of enforced mourning on a scale that was both bizarre and horrific. No crops were to be planted for a year. No milk was to be used. Any woman who became pregnant during this period was to be executed, along with her husband. Thousands of Zulus who were deemed insufficiently mournful were arbitrarily killed by Shaka's grieving warriors. The fields lay fallow, and a terrible famine began to grip the land. The man who had built the Zulu nation was now, in his sorrow, threatening to destroy it. His armies were still loyal, but his people were starving, and his half-brothers, who had long lived in his shadow, saw that the great king had become a dangerously unstable tyrant. The death of a lion in September 1828. While most of the Zulu army was away on a campaign, Shaka's two half-brothers, Dingaan and Melangina, along with a trusted servant, put their conspiracy into action. They found Shaka in his royal cattle kraal and in a surprise attack, stabbed him to death with their spears. The great king, the military genius who had conquered a vast empire, died ignominiously in the dust of his own capital. His last words were reportedly a chilling prophecy to his brothers. "Do you stab me, kings of the earth? You will come to an end through killing one another." His body was unceremoniously dumped into an empty grain pit. Dingung quickly consolidated his power, executing his fellow conspirator, and became the new king of the Zulu. He would inherit the formidable military machine Shaka had created, but he possessed none of his brother's genius, the Zulu legacy Shaka's. Reign was short, lasting only about 12 years, but its impact was immense and enduring. He had taken a clan of a few hundred people and forged it into a powerful and centralized empire that would dominate the region for the next half-century. The disciplined, courageous Zulu army he created would go on, 50 years after his death, to inflict one of the most humiliating defeats in British colonial history at the Battle of Isandlwana. His legacy is complex and deeply controversial. To many, he is a figure of national pride, the founding father of the Zulu nation, a military genius on par with Napoleon or Alexander the Great. To others, he was a brutal, bloodthirsty tyrant, the architect of the Mfecane, a man whose wars of conquest resulted in the deaths of perhaps 1 million people and caused unspeakable suffering across the subcontinent. He was in truth both. He was a visionary state builder and a ruthless despot, a product of a harsh world, who used violence and genius in equal measure to carve out an empire. He was the outcast boy who became a king, a revolutionary who changed the art of war, and a tyrant whose brief, bloody, and brilliant reign left a permanent and indelible mark on the history of Southern Africa.